I still remember the way everything began with Helen. Rob and Helen had been the quintessential childhood friends-turned-lovers story, their lives intertwined for nearly 4 decades. We were neighbors, then classmates, and somehow the universe kept throwing us together, even in high school. I often sat next to her during math class, our elbows brushing over notebooks filled with equations and daydreams. Despite the teasing from classmates, we both excelled academically. We'd whisper about our ambitions, planning trips we might never take, imagining futures that seemed impossibly bright. Helen's sudden growth spurt and her blossoming confidence drew attention from the boys around us. And I'll admit, I felt a pang of insecurity. But we always found our way back to each other. Even as our paths diverged in late high school, Helen remained warm and approachable. I struggled with feelings of mediocrity compared to her, but there was a moment, just a casual question, that changed everything. "Why have you never asked me out?" she said one afternoon, her voice teasing but curious. That question marked the turning point. I finally mustered the courage and asked her on a date. She agreed. We married at 21, and over time our love bore 2 children, grounding us in a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary. When our children arrived, Helen found a renewed energy, taking up the gym and discovering a side of herself I hadn't fully known. She became slimmer, more confident, and more radiant. Our intimacy flourished again, and I found myself falling in love with her all over, as if seeing her for the first time. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. I noticed subtle changes, her laughter lingering at different times, her attention occasionally drifting, the way she seemed more aware of the eyes on her in social situations. The first real test came during a Christmas office party. Helen, in her renewed confidence, flirted openly with some of the doctors at her hospital. I felt the sting of jealousy, but I trusted her, until Vanessa, her colleague, stepped in and made it clear she wouldn't allow anyone to disrespect me. Helen and I left that night, our ride home filled with a tense mix of excitement and unease. Later, Helen admitted to enjoying the attention, and we shared a night together that reminded me why I had married her, why I had always loved her. She explained that a bit of flirtation was a harmless fantasy for her, a playful exploration rather than a betrayal. And then she surprised me. "Maybe we can try something different? Just a little game." She suggested wearing vintage lingerie on a playful, experimental date, and I, caught up in the thrill and her infectious enthusiasm, agreed. Our first outing for this game was at a local bar. Helen wore red lingerie beneath her dress, paired with sheer stockings that caught the dim light just right. A young man in the corner noticed her immediately. I couldn't help but see the way her skirt slightly parted, revealing a hint of her thigh. It was unsettling and exhilarating all at once. Helen blushed when she noticed him looking, and I reminded her softly that this was just part of our little experiment, a light-hearted flirtation. The evening continued, the air thick with tension and excitement. Each moment, a delicate balance between curiosity, trust, and the unspoken rules we had set. When Helen stepped away to the restroom, I noticed her figure, the subtle sway, and the way the young man's eyes followed her. My heart raced, a cocktail of fear, jealousy, and unexpected excitement. And when she returned, she casually began a conversation with him, her skirt opening slightly more. She touched his arm playfully while giving me a reassuring glance. reminding me silently that this was still us, still controlled, still a game we both had consented to. By the time we left, our connection had deepened in a strange way. There had been a flirtation with danger, an exploration of boundaries, and through it all, a reaffirmation that we were in this together. Yet, even in that night's exhilaration, I felt the subtle warning that the game we had begun could spiral in ways we hadn't anticipated. The next evening, Helen seemed even more radiant, her excitement palpable as she prepared for another night out. She had chosen an outfit that was both daring and elegant, pairing deep red lace lingerie with a fitted dress that accentuated her figure. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and unease. I knew we were testing boundaries, exploring a fantasy together. But the thought of someone else noticing her stirred something in me that I couldn't easily define. As we entered the bar, the atmosphere was electric. Helen moved with confidence, and the subtle sway of her dress drew glances from everyone around. I stayed close, silently observing, aware that our little experiment had entered a public stage. Then I noticed him, Liam. He was young, sharp-eyed, and clearly intrigued. He approached Helen, offering a warm, friendly smile, introducing himself casually as if we were all old acquaintances. Helen, with that characteristic blend of charm and mischief, responded in kind. They began a light conversation, but I could sense an underlying tension in the air, the unspoken understanding that this was a test of boundaries, a careful game of control and trust. Liam spoke with confidence, assessing her reactions subtly, testing how far she would let him go without breaking the invisible rules we had agreed upon. Then came the tests. Liam's gestures were measured, deliberate, a light touch on the shoulder, a playful hand on her arm, and eventually a gentle brush against her back. Each action was a gauge, a probe into how Helen and I navigated this delicate line between fantasy and reality. Helen responded with a mix of amusement and compliance, giving just enough to satisfy the test without overstepping. My own emotions roared quietly in the background. I watched Helen, the woman I loved for decades, flirting with a stranger in a public space, and yet I found myself strangely exhilarated by the trust between us. It was a test, not just for her, but for me as well, to measure my jealousy, my boundaries, and my willingness to let her explore this side of herself, while remaining connected to me. The most critical moment came when Liam leaned in for a kiss. It was brief, experimental, almost clinical, but the electricity in the air was undeniable. Helen reciprocated just enough to satisfy the test, her eyes flicking toward me, silently asking if I was okay. I responded with a calm 0, signaling that for me this was enough and that we should step back. The balance had been tested and held for the moment. Liam smiled, a mix of admiration and curiosity, understanding the limits of the game. He handed Helen his number, emphasizing that they were friends and that this was merely an exploration, not a conquest. We thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and adrenaline as we left the bar. The ride home was quiet, but charged with unspoken emotions. Helen leaned into me, whispering softly about the thrill of the night and how much she appreciated our trust and openness. Back home, the intensity of the evening carried over. There was an intimacy between us that felt renewed, more passionate, and somehow deeper than before. The flirtation, the tension, and the test had brought us closer, not apart. Yet beneath the exhilaration, a subtle anxiety lingered. The awareness that playing with boundaries could have consequences we hadn't fully anticipated. The next day, we spoke openly about what had happened. I admitted to being fascinated by her courage and beauty, even when it was on display for someone else. Helen confessed that the attention had excited her, and she wanted to explore this playful side further, always with me by her side. We agreed on rules, boundaries, and signals to ensure that our games remained safe, consensual, and rooted in trust. But even as we laughed and planned the next evening, I felt a nagging unease. The thrill of experimentation was intoxicating, but the closer we came to the edges of social convention, the sharper the risk of things going awry. Little did we know, the evening that followed would test not just our trust, but the very foundation of our marriage, in ways neither of us could have imagined. The following evening, Helen seemed more determined than ever. She dressed carefully, each piece of her outfit chosen to command attention. A fitted black dress with a daring slit, and elegant heels that clicked confidently on the pavement. Her excitement was contagious, but beneath it, I sensed a tension I couldn't ignore. Tonight felt different. The stakes had changed. We arrived at the same bar, and as soon as we stepped inside, the energy shifted. Helen's presence drew eyes immediately. Liam, waiting in the corner, gave us a subtle nod, acknowledging that the game was about to continue. I stayed by Helen's side, a silent anchor, aware that this was no longer just a playful experiment. It was a delicate balance of desire, trust, and risk. Liam approached, calm and composed, but with an intensity I hadn't noticed before. The conversation began casually, but soon the subtle tests resumed. A touch here, a glance there, each movement calculated to probe boundaries. Helen responded with her usual charm, playful and alluring, yet careful. I noticed her hesitation at times, a flash of uncertainty that made my heart race. Then came the turning point. As Liam brushed against Helen's arm, I saw her fingers tighten around her glass, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. My instincts screamed at me. The line between fantasy and reality was thinning. I realized that the game we had agreed upon was starting to blur in ways we hadn't fully anticipated. Liam leaned closer, testing her reaction with a bold, lingering look. Helen's lips curved into a smile, but there was something different in her eyes. Curiosity, yes, but also an eagerness that unsettled me. The flirtation, once a controlled experiment, was evolving into something unpredictable. My pulse quickened, a mix of jealousy and adrenaline coursing through me. Then, the unexpected happened. Liam's hand brushed against Helen's thigh, more deliberate this time. Helen's reaction was subtle, a slight shift, a barely audible breath, but it was enough. My mind raced. I wanted to intervene to reclaim control, but at the same time, I had promised her freedom to explore. The very foundation of trust we had built felt like it was teetering on the edge. I decided to act with calm authority. I took her hand, giving a reassuring squeeze, a silent signal that the experiment had gone far enough. Helen met my eyes, understanding instantly. We agreed, wordlessly, to step back. The tension didn't vanish entirely, but it was tempered by the unspoken trust between us. Liam, ever observant, seemed to understand the shift. He smiled politely, handing Helen his number once more, emphasizing that they remained friends and that boundaries had to be respected. We thanked him and left the bar, both of us enveloped in a strange mix of relief, exhilaration, and lingering anxiety. Back at home, Helen was quiet, contemplative. The energy between us had changed. Heavier, charged with emotion, but also with intimacy. We spoke candidly about the night, dissecting every glance, every touch, every unspoken signal. I admitted my feelings, a mix of excitement, pride, and unease. Helen, in turn, confessed her curiosity and the thrill she had felt, but also a realization of how fragile our trust was. We agreed on stricter rules moving forward. Signals for consent, clear boundaries, and absolute honesty became our new framework. Yet, beneath the laughter and planning, a subtle fear lingered, the knowledge that one misstep could unravel everything. Little did we know the next evening would not just test our boundaries, but confront us with consequences we had never imagined. A simple flirtation, a playful experiment, was about to spiral into a chain of events that would challenge the very foundation of our marriage. The next evening arrived with a quiet tension. Helen moved through the apartment with purpose, selecting her outfit carefully. Tonight, it wasn't just about flirting. There was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that what had begun as an experiment could take a life of its own. She wore a sleek, navy dress, modest, yet suggestive, paired with understated heels that made her stride confident and deliberate. I watched her, my heart a mix of admiration and unease. When we arrived at the bar, the atmosphere was charged. Liam was already there, waiting, his presence calm but commanding. Helen greeted him with a warm smile, and I felt a pang of jealousy I hadn't expected. Liam's eyes flicked to me briefly, a silent acknowledgement that tonight would be more than just casual interaction. I reminded myself to stay composed, to let Helen explore, but within limits we had both agreed upon. The evening began innocently enough. Light conversation, shared laughter, small touches, subtle glances. Yet as the night progressed, I noticed the dynamics shifting. Liam's gestures became more deliberate, testing boundaries we had previously considered unbreachable. Helen responded with playful charm, but there was a new intensity in her eyes, curiosity tinged with daring. I felt a tight knot of unease in my chest. Then it happened. Liam leaned in, whispering something in Helen's ear, his hand brushing her arm, in a way that lingered longer than necessary. Helen laughed softly, a sound that sent a jolt through me. My instinct was to pull her away, to reclaim control of the situation. But I paused, reminding myself that this was part of the agreement. She had the freedom to explore, and I had to trust her judgment. Suddenly a subtle shift occurred. Helen's attention momentarily faltered, her focus drawn entirely to Liam. I felt a wave of panic, a visceral fear that our experiment had gone too far. I stepped closer, placing my hand lightly on her back, grounding both of us. Helen's eyes met mine, and I saw the same understanding mirrored there, the realization that our boundaries had been tested to their limits. I decided it was time to end the experiment for the night. I whispered to Helen, suggesting we leave, and she nodded, relief washing over her face. Liam noticed the change, offering a polite smile and a nod, handing Helen his number again and stressing friendship, respect, and boundaries. We accepted gracefully and exited the bar, stepping into the cool night air. Walking home, the silence between us was heavy, but comfortable. Helen's hand brushed against mine, and we squeezed fingers, a silent reassurance of trust and connection. Back at the apartment, we sat together, recounting each moment, analyzing reactions, emotions, and impulses. I admitted my fears, jealousy, unease, and the realization of how fragile our trust had been. Helen shared hers: excitement, curiosity, and a newfound understanding of the consequences of crossing emotional boundaries. We agreed on stricter rules moving forward: absolute transparency, clear signals of consent, and boundaries that could not be crossed. Yet beneath the laughter and planning, a shadow remained: the knowledge that one misstep could unravel everything we had built. A few days later, the consequences hit unexpectedly. A mutual friend, unaware of our private arrangement, mentioned seeing Helen and Liam together in a public setting, interpreting their interaction as intimate beyond what we had agreed. Rumors began to spread, reaching colleagues, neighbors, and eventually social media. Helen was mortified, and I felt the crushing weight of unintended consequences. What had been an experiment between us was now subject to public scrutiny, judgment, and misunderstanding. We faced the choice to retreat, to stop the flirtation experiment entirely, or continue under the new, harsher reality. Helen and I sat together for hours, discussing, reflecting, and ultimately deciding that trust, honesty, and our marriage were more important than anyone else's perception. We would move forward carefully, with lessons learned, boundaries reinforced, and a deeper appreciation for each other's loyalty. That night, as I held Helen close, I realized that our experiment had taught us far more than we anticipated. It revealed vulnerabilities, tested boundaries, and forced honesty in ways that traditional communication never could. The flirtation had been a risk, but the real discovery was the strength of our bond, the depth of our trust, and the resilience of our love. In the end, what began as a provocative experiment became a mirror, reflecting our fears, desires, and the unshakable truth that love, trust, and respect require constant care, and that sometimes the most challenging moments can bring the greatest growth.